Okay, things I'm interested in Conker's Bad Fur Day. One thing I'm interested in is that in the farm section, you've got two men at either side of the farm who complain about their wives or lovers or something being fat women. Another thing I'm interested in is that the vampire gets attacked by villagers who throw pitchforks at him, and the pitchfork also has appeared as an element of like weaponry, as a weapon in the farm section. So it appears, the pitchfork appears as a weapon, so to speak, as farming implement and weapon both times, two times. Another thing I'm interested in is how in the farm, you could say, this is more of a stretch, but you could say that there are two characters who crave dairy products. Why? One of them is the king, because the king wants to suckle on the breasts of the sunflower. Now, you could say that the reason he wants that is because he wants to have sex with her, and that sex for him is pollination, and therefore, at some level, you could say that if he is to obtain anything, it would be pollen, or at least even get rid of pollen and deposit the pollen on the stigma, right? That would be the imagery that would be evoked by pollination. However, since the stigmas are here shown to be the breasts, then at the same time, this feels like focusing one's desire. The king's desire is focused on the breasts and playing with the breasts or doing something to the breasts. So you could say, again, it's a stretch, but you could say that what he's going to do symbolically is at some level breast feeding, or, you know, there's an orientation towards dairy product, here understood as milk. And dairy product on the other side of the barn is understood as cheese, and consumed by the rat or the rodent there. A mouse, rat, I can't remember. He eats cheese. And of course, this could all relate back to the dairy product consumption by the king himself, the Panther King, who consumes milk in this case, the dairy product being milk in his case. In fact, the whole game revolves around reclaiming this dairy product for the king that he has lost. He has lost the ability to drink milk, and he wants to reclaim that ability. He needs his cup of milk. Otherwise, he doesn't want to not have it, let's say. It's angry for him. Another thing I find interesting, this one is a little more abstract, is that the Great Mighty Pooh has got sweet corns as teeth. He has a big mouth of full rows of teeth made of sweet corn. And I was thinking, teeth, I think, have some connection to this game. Here are a few examples of connections that I think maybe exist. One is that Conker is a rodent, a squirrel, and rodents, etymologically the name rodent refers to its gnawing quality, the fact that the rodent can gnaw through things, bite through them with its teeth. So the name of the rodent already kind of refers to its teeth and the ability to use its teeth kind of accurately to achieve its goals or something. As some sort of a central, it's as if the teeth is a central element of the rodent, a quality of the rodent that's central, as if the rodent means biting through things, eating through things. Another connection to teeth is that Conker is specifically in a family, like his heritage is he's connected to the coolers of Conk, who are this family or this lineage of vampire squirrel bats. And squirrel bats would also have big teeth. In fact, big sharp teeth in the case of Dracula, these Dracula characters, because these are sharp. The sharpness of the teeth is central to them. It's all about biting into people in order to eat them, feeding on people thanks to these teeth. I'll take a little detour here. It feels to me as if the Panther King's obsession with milk is the kind of obsession with milk that comes from, let's say, the archetype of the baby, a baby breastfeeding. Why do I think that? Because I think the Panther King's comedic sort of attributes, the comedy in his character, is, I think, partly based in the juxtaposition of him being a very powerful, strong, adult, like he's a king, so he's lording over other people. He's a paternal kind of figure, but he wants his milk, and wanting your milk is kind of like a childlike thing. It's a childlike drink, also sort of evoking the idea of kitty cats drinking milk from a bowl. So even though he's a big, scary panther, it also evokes the idea of a small, weak kitty cat sort of thing. So there's almost like a juxtaposition of adulthood and childhood in him. That's not a very strong case that I'm making, but if we accept that case, then drinking milk is also sort of suckling on breasts, and that is something, if I'm not mistaken, that you do precisely because you don't have teeth. So babies drink milk because they don't have teeth, so they can only feed on things that don't require any biting or chewing at all, if I understand things correctly. So the apparition of teeth as a central element could maybe in this game be juxtaposed to the lack of teeth that comes from maybe having to drink milk as your main feeding source in childhood, juxtaposed to having teeth and being able to bite into other things that are not milk in any way. And what those things are, I guess, will become clearer in subsequent analyses, but the idea of biting into people has already come into the game in some way. And also, again, the potential of teeth having something to do with maybe non-childhood, like something not childlike, something precisely adult and biting and scary and dangerous in some way. And of course, the rodents, I think, have they're scary in this game. The two cube people, where one of them's hiding from the rodent, there is a fear of rodents, right? The rodent's so scary that you jump on top of higher ground to get away from it. I have a feeling this fear of rodents comes from a fear of infection, maybe rodents causing infection and spreading infection across the town. I don't know much about that, but I suppose in plagues and things like that, maybe that's where this fear of rodents comes from, in culturally speaking. But also maybe because rodents also bite into things, so they can gnaw at the roots of a tree and therefore ruin the tree. They can gnaw into the foundations of a building and therefore kind of ruin the foundations of the building. There's something plague-like and ruinous maybe in a rodent that, and I'm kind of ad-libbing here. I mean, the whole thing's ad-libbing, but ad-libbing to say that maybe a rodent is kind of like bad news. Something's rotten, something's becoming plagued. And drinking milk is something very innocent, very childlike, very uninfected, undangerous, you know. Anyway, so there could be some of that happening. The purity of the king's desire for milk and for something childlike that connects him to his childhood being sort of broken by something that breaks the foundation of this world. Conker, a rodent, something that's gnawing at the roots of the world. And of course, the Panther King, the whole story of the Panther King is that the table leg collapses. So precisely the foundation, something that was stable in his world, fails. Something collapses. Something deep in the foundations of how his material world works breaks, rots, is infected, so to speak, plagued. The table leg doesn't work anymore. It cracks, it splinters. I have a feeling that that's sort of what this game is about at some level. But that was a little bit of a big detour. Maybe another thing I can say is that if you look at the background of the game from some high location like Bat's Tower, if you look at the background imagery, you can see that the Panther King's castle has an entrance shaped precisely like a mouth with big teeth that you need to walk in through. So entering into that castle means entering into the mouth of something with big teeth that can eat you and bite you alive. So the imagery of entering into the mouth of someone being a doorway that you can enter into, is, at least in this case, present. And of course present also in the the prehistoric section, when you open up the mouth of the dragon and enter into the mouth of the dragon. So you're entering into the mouth of someone, you're almost not just into the mouth, but down into the bowels. You enter into the dragon's stomach. You're being sort of eaten and digested by this mouth. Okay, jumping to another thing I'm interested in this game is Bat's Tower, precisely. You're led to Bat's Tower by a fish, right, who leads the way. And this fish wants you sort of to kind of get rid of a brute who has stolen their money. This is me reading into it, of course, but there's a feeling that there's a group of women who want to be sort of, they're in a situation that there is some problematic situation having to do with a man who is a brute. Okay, anyway, jumping into the interior then of the Bat's Tower, you find the same situation again. You find a group of female cogs who want to be liberated from this man who is treating them as sex objects, as like tools in his little Bat's Tower place. So there is this duality of the two situations, simultaneously saving the women outside who want to be freed from the presence. I'm reading into they don't ever say they want to be freed, the fish, but it feels to me like the bullfish, the dogfish guy, is a presence that sort of limits their freedom. They can't freely go to their bank account because the bank account is being protected by this dog. So they need to get rid of the dog so that they can freely enter into their own space, let's say, or their house or something. And to free them, this dog needs to be wound up, as they say. And winding the dog up grants them freedom from the dog, because now the dog is no longer problematic to them. He's hidden away, and it's safe to walk through that stretch of river. But in order, therefore, to save them from this dog, the inner cog people, also the women, need to be saved from the male cog. That is to say, the male cog needs to be broken away from the whole cog system, and that process of breaking the male cog away from his own system and put in a different situation is simultaneously what winds the dog up. Really over-explaining this, but it winds the dog up, and therefore, let's say, liberates the women outside and also liberates the women inside, because now they no longer have to live in that cog machinery place. They can be free and they go on holiday. So both sets of groups of women get saved from their respective sort of men who were forcing them to not be free in some way by the same action. The same act gets both groups liberated at the same time. It's like the same action has two different ramifications and two different levels of analysis or something. I don't know. My mind takes me now to the Count Bachelor scene again. Count Bachelor wants to eat villagers. Okay. And he has installed this enormous, like, crack in the floor. There's this big crack in the floor because he's doing renovations. Renovations, what that means is he wants to crack the floor so that he can then, what he'll put inside that cracked floor is something that's like a machinery to destroy people, basically. I'm intrigued also in connection to this, the fact that in the farm you also perform a crack on the floor cracks open, and what happens down below that crack is that a machine wakes up, and a deathly machine in some way, right? You fight this big robot, and you also exist in a world of pipes and wires and electricity. So the technology that's below the farm is, let's say, more advanced, more futuristic than the technology that's above the farm. Above the farm, the above level, it's oldie worldy farm from the past, right? Conker makes reference to the fact that he doesn't live in the past like them, he lives in the 21st century. And then down below we get Terminator reference, robot world, electricity, something much more futuristic. I mean, Terminator itself is something very futuristic. It references the future in some way. So I like this idea of there being potentially an old world above and a new world below, and the new world being technology, modern technology, and the old world being old technology, traditional technology, like the farm. In Count Bachelor's house, you have something similar, because the above world, the above structure of the house, is just an oldie worldy, like, I don't know what it would be, a Victorian Gothic architecture place, like a mansion from the past, an old aristocratic traditional mansion for a Dracula, right? That sort of a mansion. It's made of wood. The materials that are required are old, traditional materials. And then there is a crack in the floor, like in the farm, and that crack in the floor leads you down into a world that is basically made of machines that presumably would require electricity. Not necessarily, but you would imagine electricity, metal, steel, glass. There's glass windows in the pumps. So, I mean, glass isn't a very new material, but the way, like the aesthetics of the machine in the Dracula segment seem very futuristic, more futuristic maybe than the rest of the house. More open to the possibility of being a technology that's slightly, what would you call it, jarring with the chronology of the the time when Dracula is set. You wouldn't usually see those sorts of machineries inside such an old traditional house. Like that's kind of the idea. And the idea then extends in some interesting way because, of course, we see also the queen bee has this beehive that's a really, old school, traditional, like nature sort of thing. Trees, rivers, beehives. It's a very sort of traditional, natural kind of thing that would exist without any need for technology within it. But there is technology within it. There are turret guns and whatever else, guns, machines. There's this whole artillery of technological weapons that exist within this more natural, oldie-worldy kind of structure, such as the beehive. A beehive precisely being a place like a home that's constructed by the workers, the worker bees, I suppose, and constructed with sort of very traditional methods of work that have been used forever and ever, right? The same way that beehives were made when my grandfather existed and so on. But then inside it, there's this big old turret gun that belongs to a completely different age and to a more modern age than the ages that beehives would be made in traditionally. And of course, when I say traditionally, I mean the fact that beehives themselves evoke, I think, what you call it, an old countryside, nature and animals and trees kind of world. Pastoral, I guess, is the word, kind of world. So one thing I can say that maybe ties all this into the rest of the game is that I think the rest of the game relies on this idea because we've got the Panther King, who's a king. It's a lineage. When the king is dead, then the future king puts the same crown on, sits on the same throne. You're sitting on the same throne that your ancestors sat on. You're wearing the same crown, and maybe you even have the same title, obviously living in the same castle, and maybe even upholding the same rules and regulations that kings of the past did. So you're upholding a society in a traditional kind of way. You're upholding the traditions of the past, blah, blah, blah. There's that sort of an idea, I think, in the idea of kinghood and kings, especially this sort of king that the Panther King is, like a medieval king of this kind, fairy tale sort of king, also evokes like an oldie-worldy fairy tale world where the birds sing in the trees and, like Disney movie kind of pastoral world of kings and queens and fantasy lands with green forests and lakes and I don't know that kind of the fairy tale nature of it and the medieval nature of it, I think, point towards the traditional past aspect. But within this traditional past world, there is an inventor, the professor, who is in some sort of a relationship with the king as the king's helper or as the king's enemy. There's some relationship. So you got the king, and then you got this inventor, scientist, who wants to go into outer space and create new machines. He wants new things, and he wants to destroy this old structure. He wants something completely different from the traditional structure, something technological and new and futuristic. So I think there is almost in the center of the game some sort of a dialogue between traditional structures and futuristic structures, evoked by the Panther King on the side of tradition, I would say, and the professor on the side of the inventor, technology, future. I don't know, it doesn't super work, but I think there's something there. And another thing, this may not work super well either, but I think the very nature of the game kind of does something like this, because the game, as I interpret it, is sort of, how would I say this? It's reading from a series of texts that are famous in that era, like cartoons. The idea of cartoons that are obscene is sort of a popular idea that, like, Robert Crumb has done in comic books, and I don't know, there's other examples of this, but I think it's also like it's a whole school of thought. Let's say it's a whole school of a certain type of entertainment, whereby you grab something very innocent and pure, which kind of goes back to the idea of the milk and the child and all that, and then you put something really rugged and adult and sort of evil and obscene within it, and you combine those two. So you could say that the world of cartoons evokes precisely a nature world. It's animals, it's little butterflies and trees and rivers and fluffy clouds and animals, happily jumping around. The cartoon world, I think, is a pastoral sort of world. It's a world of nature and oldie worldy, the way things have always been. The rivers have been flowing the same way since ever. The trees, the skies, the animals running around. I think this sort of cartoon image, specifically these kind of anthropomorphized animal cartoons. Anyway, you get my point. I think it's sort of this sort of nature oldness. But then when you put obscenity into them, it's clashing with the time, because it's something that, it's something new. I don't know. It's something that probably wouldn't have started happening until, I imagine, the 60s or something. I'm saying that because I suppose that I am only thinking of Robert Crumb here, but I suppose that must have been maybe when stuff like that started to happen. And therefore, you introducing a more modern aesthetic into this old cartoony world. You're putting guns and swearing, like words that would never have been said in those sorts of environments in cartoons in its origin. So again, maybe I'm overstating this, and you see what I mean, that within the cartoon, whose surface is oldie worldy, within it are words that are very obscene, actions that are very obscene, violence, things that are sort of counter chronological to the era. They're not of the same time than the pastoral world that is being evoked, I think, kind of.